Thank you very much. So I joined Lambeth as the head of data, analytics and insight, sort of early on this year, and at the height of a pandemic, really. And all the plans that we had were suddenly cast aside, and everyone got deployed onto coronavirus and looking after people in the community. So what we learned, we'll discuss what we learned in a moment, but I think one of the key things to say is that data is not information. Data is measurements and sort of facts about different things. But unless you make sense of it, then it doesn't really benefit anyone. So bits and bytes, computers understand, but we're humans and we like it in a different form. And I think there are four real key steps in data, and the middle two, the kind of collecting data and processing it, they're getting more and more democratized, and the tools are getting better and faster, and we're getting really almost a push button insight sometimes. But the first and the last are perhaps the most important. So the first step is you must align your initiatives with business outcomes. So you need to provide value, and ideally you need to be able to quantify what you're doing so that you know you're heading in the right direction. And the last step, I think, is people that consume the information you provide have to understand what it means for them, how to use it, how to make business decisions based on it. So the education piece is really important. So while we're squeezing the technology in the middle, it's often the beginning and the end that we forget about a little, and then wonder why we've spent a long time creating data that can't really help us. And the story today is not just data. So data is the input and sometimes the output, but really we're looking at the whole process and some of the changes we made to cope with the pandemic, and also to set us up in Lambeth up for what came afterwards. So now things are quieting down, hopefully, and we hope the winter won't be too bad for us. Then Lambeth will continue to apply some of the lessons we learned to do other things. So I'll just skip over that. So a little bit about Lambeth for anyone that doesn't know. So it's the largest in a London borough. There's around 320,000 people. I think 150 different languages are spoken throughout Lambeth. So it really is a diverse community. And I think throughout the height of the pandemic, we made use of data to really help. And sometimes we had literally hours to prepare something. So government would say, okay, we're starting search testing, which is looking for variants of the coronavirus. We're starting search testing in 2 days. Please get ready and get people knocking doors and dropping off kits and collecting kits. So we had to work far quicker and more efficiently than we ever had done before. And I think also when you start looking around the local authority, you find data everywhere. So the NHS, the Department of Health and Social Care, Public Health England, the Board of Education, Age UK, we were consuming data from just literally everywhere. And sometimes it's not about collecting more of it, it's about making sense of what you have. And also there's latency. So Public Health England sometimes submitted the same information, but it had changed compared to the NHS data. So we had to consolidate everything before we started to make any active use of it. So as I've said, what we learned during the pandemic, we've carried forward, and there is now a data strategy being created, or well, being sort of improved on as we speak. So we came up with five key needs when we were sat there wondering how on earth we were going to cope with a global problem. So the first one, which is obviously a well-known series of films, The Need for Speed. So what we found was that everyone wanted everything immediately, and that was impossible to do. We had a finite team. There were around 12, 13 people sort of serving the entire authority. So we had to make things happen really quickly. And to do that, tools were really a good help. So tools don't provide the benefits, but they really help to deliver them. And we use Microsoft and Power Apps and the Power Platform to put things together really quickly. And we'll talk a little more about that later on. The need for focus. So sometimes people ask for things, and when you challenge in a nice way, you find actually that it takes quite a bit of effort to deliver something that really doesn't provide a great amount of benefit. So I think challenging in a fair way is a good thing to do. And sometimes, we had debates and we had arguments about information that really wasn't providing any benefit, and we had to put higher priority things first. And that was a challenge, but that happened throughout the pandemic. And I'm sure it continues to do that today. The need for compromise. So people ask for things, and sometimes we give them part of the solution, just enough to help them do what they need to do. So sometimes the gold plating we just didn't have time for. To be fair, we didn't have time for that before the pandemic, but we certainly didn't have time for it during the pandemic. So sometimes it was a case of, okay, you want this, but I can give it to you, but in a slightly different form or a slightly different format, but please make use of it. It will still help you do what you need to do. The need to deliver. So delivering early and often. So when you provide value for any organization, then the sooner you do that, the better. So what we found was, rather than trying to hide away for a week and working like crazy to deliver something, we'd get something out the door, often within hours, and then gather feedback, which is really, really valuable. And that feedback allowed us to improve what we had and iterate. And this is really, really important, because what people ask for on day one is different on day two. We found that we put solutions in place that matched exactly what people were asking for, but 2 or 3 hours in a live environment and everything changes. So keep gathering feedback. It's really, really important. And then of course, the need to continually improve what we're doing. So feedback helps that. But I think we had a metric for lessons learned, and the metric was how many lessons or how many improvements could we identify. And I changed that around to say that actually it's the improvements that you make that count. So I don't care if we've found 500 new ways of working. If we've implemented 2 of them, then that's the key metric we should be measuring. So the first thing, when I landed, there was no real process. So I spoke to all the departments about what they needed and how they interacted with the data team. And I think the biggest feedback was that the team did a good job. However, it was impossible to know when something was going to drop out of the pipe. So a request would be made, it would be written down somewhere. People would keep knocking the door saying, how's it going? Is it ready? And there was really no kind of focus on estimation or on scheduling or planning. And so we didn't want to wrap everyone up and tie everyone up with some kind of detailed process. But what we needed was a lightweight way to raise visibility. Because when you don't know where something is, it always seems to take longer. And when things have to happen in hours rather than weeks or months, then obviously this is really, really important. So the diagram on the left is just a really simple process. So we had a visible list. We created it in SharePoint. It was simple. We'd always have a qualification to work out, do we really need to do what's being asked? There'd be a kickoff meeting. So everyone starts with the same understanding. What data do we have? What do we want to do with it? What do we need to present? What do we want to predict? So the goals for the outcomes was really clearly detailed right from the beginning, and they would change as we went, but it's very important to have a list of them. We'd work on a service, we'd iterate. So if it's not complete, we'd deliver what we had, or we'd demonstrate what we had, get feedback, and then we'd go around this kind of loop until we thought we were ready. We'd submit it for some kind of user acceptance testing, and then we'd learn some lessons and move on to the next thing. And I think doing things in this way in short iterations made sure that we got feedback from everyone, and nobody is better than everybody. So everyone had a voice, and everyone was allowed to contribute. We used value effort mapping. So it's an old strategy, but it's still a valid one and a valuable one. And what we did was get online, because we couldn't get in a room at the time, with Miro or some other kind of online platform. And we just write all the initiatives onto Post-its, virtual Post-its, and then we'd position them in terms of value and effort. So if you look at the diagram on the left, you can see that things in the top left-hand corner provide high value, but they're relatively low effort. So these are kind of the quick wins. And when you're starting something, to gain confidence, quick wins are really, really essential, so that people understand that you can deliver value for them. And then the top right is kind of the high value and high effort. So these are the strategic goals. And sometimes we just didn't have time for them. Sometimes we break them down. And as you break them down, they tend to drift left. So they become quicker wins. And then they get to the point where we can actually start delivering them. And then the bottom left is the some value, but lower value, but equally small effort. And these are normally limited benefits. So for a particular department or for a particular area or initiative. So still valuable, and we can deliver some of them. We're always trying to move them up, so the value we deliver from them is greater. And then the final one, bottom right, is things that you should steer clear of unless they change considerably. So low value, high effort, who needs them? So the need for compromise. So when demand exceeds capacity, which it always does in a local authority, then we have to compromise, as I mentioned at the beginning. But compromise doesn't necessarily mean cutting corners or reducing quality. What it means is picking out the most important, valuable things and delivering them first. And then if there's time left, we can do something else, or otherwise we move on and we attack a different challenge. It's a little bit like the Pareto 80-20 law. 20% of the effort delivers 80% of the value, and we're always mindful of that. And during a pandemic, you can analyze data to death, and we can slice and dice it in 100 different ways. But unless what we're doing addresses a real problem or delivers real value, then we need to stop doing it. Pushing risk back. So the nice thing about getting continual feedback is we're always sort of navigating our path and changing our path a little, so that we start off with a clear direction, but sometimes we do a U-turn before we're finished, because we continue to learn, and that learning means we change what we're doing. Just move on. Oops, excuse me. So the need to deliver early and often. So really, this is just a really, really simple process. So add a new feature, demonstrate the feature to users, collect feedback. If that feedback means we need to make a change, we'll make it. Otherwise, we just move on, and then we do the next thing. And I think a really important point here as well is that features are not benefits. So always try to think in terms of benefit. So how will your community or your team or someone else benefit from what you're doing? And I think there's an old saying that says, sell the sizzle, not the sausage. So we should always be thinking about the sizzle. Sausage crisps, there's a thought. Very nice. And I think engage users before you build anything. So make sure that they understand. And when they understand what you're doing, they can then contribute. So we changed something. We used to have a thing where a senior person in a department would come along and say, I've collected all the information from my team, and now I want to deliver it to you. But even though they do that in a good way, it's never the same as the people themselves. So we know we can't get every single person in every meeting, but have more than one person, get the voices from different people, and you'll be surprised by the different perspectives. And we found some really interesting things by doing this that just didn't come to light otherwise. And then always encourage users and stakeholders to share thoughts and suggestions. So, my view is no matter how meaningless you may think something is, it doesn't matter. If it's niggling at you, just say it. It may not get done, but always share. Don't be afraid to share. And I think I mentioned the part about challenging. So someone asked me for some Department of Education data, and I think we were getting information from kind of 4 schools out of 100 or something. So that just was not representative of the whole of the borough. So the data was meaningless, and it would have taken several days to put this information together. But when, if you draw a straight line through 4 points of data when there are 100 or 120, then really you have to worry about the value. So we would push back hard sometimes. And then that doesn't mean that we do nothing. We may try and contact more schools, get more information. We have to make sure that the data you've got is representative of what you're doing, that you have sufficient amounts of it, that it's accurate enough, that it's timely as well. And if you don't have that data, sometimes you can wait. Sometimes you have to do something else because you just don't have the data you need. But sometimes you can work harder on things like feature extraction. So in other words, a feature is just a piece of data. It's similar to kind of a column in a database table. So it tells you something, but maybe you can use something else to get the same information. And we looked hard sometimes and said, well, we don't have this piece of data we need, but if we combine these other 2 pieces, we can kind of get the same result. And that was a really important thing for us. And it unblocked or got us over some of the walls that we hit during the pandemic. So the need for continuous improvement. So I think one of the important things is that when people are afraid or scared of making mistakes, then innovation suffers, and we don't get these, eureka moments that quite often come along in the middle of the night. So we encourage people not to be careless. We have to be careful and mindful of what we're doing, But we said, making mistakes is allowed because that's how you learn. You know, I remember that we worked at a distillery once, and thousands and thousands of bottles of whiskey were whizzing around on some kind of mechanized belt. And nothing ever went wrong until one day a bottle dropped on the corner of the belt. And what that meant was they were able to make an improvement that stopped that from happening. So making mistakes is valuable as long as and allowed, as long as we learn from them. And I think here I've just put about Peter Drucker, you know, what gets measured gets managed. So at the very beginning, think about how you measure progress, because otherwise, you know, all you've got is anecdotal evidence, and that can help and that can be a good thing. But if you can actually measure what you're doing and make sure you're heading in the right direction, then you can work out when to stop. And I think with data, knowing when to stop is sometimes as important as knowing when to start. So I've seen projects where, you know, we've made a 10% improvement very quickly, but then spend 10 times longer getting the next 1%, and you really can fall into a rabbit hole. So I think set thresholds, and you can change them and review them, excuse me, but when you achieve your goal, think hard about moving on and getting that 10% somewhere else where it's equally valuable. And I think the final thing here, you know, prioritize what to do next rather than dwelling for too long on what went wrong. So look at mistakes and try and avoid them for the future, but always focus on the next valuable thing that you're doing rather than going over and over things that you've already achieved. So here, there's just a little thing about working better together. And we've got, at Objectivity, there are 10 principles of engagement. And these apply sort of everywhere, really. And some of these were really valuable in the time at Lambeth. The first one, not so much, but don't suffer in silence. So we had some smart people doing you know, really intelligent things with data, but sometimes they get stuck and they wouldn't want to say, and before they realize, you know, 3 or 4 or 5 days have gone, and then they're wishing they put their hand up sooner. So we encourage everyone, when you have a problem, don't think that it's a bad thing. It empowers you. If you put your hand up and say, this is a problem, then what you'll do is you'll kick wheels into motion and you'll get some help and solve things quicker. Avoid communication hierarchies. So, you know, we don't want to, oh, can't spell hierarchies, but there you go. So what you need to do is speak to the person that can help you. Don't go to their boss and their boss's boss and their boss's boss's boss and then get it passed down again. Go directly to the people that can help you and talk to them. Demonstrate rather than describe is a big thing for us. So always demonstrate, because if you write something down, you can write a 100-page specification about how a particular service or report works. But when people see it, you know, a picture is worth 1,000 words. So always demonstrate, even if it's incomplete. Even if you display a summary report that isn't correct, at least the principle can be shown and you can improve. Because going back, once you've finished something, changing it then is much harder. So change it as you move forward rather than looking back afterwards. And a couple more things, write less code. So we use Power Platform, and Power BI was used almost to death within Lambeth. So everything was exposed through Power BI. And that's not always a bad thing, other than sometimes charts were creative. And when I asked people what they meant, no one could describe them. And, you know, I'm a mathematician at heart, and I think when you have a graph that doesn't have labeled axes or you don't know what they're measuring, then what's the point in having them? So we stripped a lot of that back and we focused on, you know, some real core reports. And we had something called a combined dashboard, and it was created in Power BI from many data sources, and it was submitted to the Gold board for central government. And it measured some key things and some key initiatives. And we started from first principles again. And we had something like, I think it was 500 dashboards. And they quickly came down to about 100 and then down to 50. And what that meant was we were measuring things that really made a difference to people's lives. And we could focus our attention on them more. Just keeping 500 dashboards running is an impossible task. And just the other couple of things I'll mention on this slide. So build teams, not superstars. So, you know, every team might have a superstar, the person you go to when there's a problem and you need it to be solved, and they're always the people that solve the problem. But actually, more often than not, these are the people that communicate and collaborate better. So they're the people who know where to go to find an answer when they don't have it themselves. So in our teams, everyone was equal. You know, the head of data, when I announced my position to the team, They said, well, no, we're working for you. I said, no, I'm working for you. So my role was working for them and making sure their desks were clear and that they had everything they needed to do a great job. And the final thing here is share a single version of the truth. So while sometimes we need different perspectives on data, we must make sure that that data is accurate. And when someone says, I once asked for a risk register and someone said, do you want the internal one or the customer facing one? And we had no time for that. So we didn't have time to do things the first time around sometimes. So to keep 2 records or 3 records was just impossible. So have one version of the truth, stand behind it and share it with everyone. So just wanted to look at a case study. So surge testing is looking for variants of the virus and variants of concern. And we've all heard of the Delta virus, and this kicked in Lambeth. And we did 3 operations of sort of door-to-door and mobile test units. And the government said, there's an area of concern. We need to make sure everyone's safe. We need to offer tests. We need to support and help people who test positive. And we're starting tomorrow. So what happened was someone called in and said they'd gone to a local stationer's. They were collecting notebooks and pens and getting ready to write everything down. But rather than do that, we took a Microsoft Power Platform. And if I just move on to this slide here, you can see what happened was, so CV data, top left, this is clinically extremely vulnerable people. So these are people with challenges already. And, they're the people that often need the most help during the pandemic. So we got CEV data, we got adult social care data, we got the GIS team to build a catchment. So they built a list of addresses of everyone in a particular area that we had to cover. And then we did a big thing about data processing, pulled all the data together, consolidated it, deduplicated it as best we could. This was then loaded. So the top stream was for CEV people. So what happened was we had a team who called them first, made sure they were okay, dealt with any emergencies that needed to be taken care of. And then once we'd done that operation, we then fed the data and updated this master data for search testing database here. And what that meant was then we had a good view and we'd already addressed the people with the most urgent needs. And the 2 applications we built were both built using Microsoft Power Platform, Power Apps, and they were data-driven apps, which is great because they're not going to win any kind of UI UX awards, but they expose the data for us and almost at the push of a button, and it just gives us everything we need. So we had Samsung tablets. A lesson we learned was that charge the tablets before giving them people on the streets. But what happened was we were able to deploy applications onto the tablet. Door-to-door operators went to designated areas, knocked doors, dropped kits off, picked them back up again, and we could make sense of the variant. A number of reports were built through Power BI. So the reports for operators, so people would call in and say, I've got a report, but can you show me the residences where kids have been dropped off but not collected? Or can it show me where X kids have been dropped off, but less than X kids have been collected? So in that way, we could focus and people could have real-time reports showing them which houses and which streets they needed to visit. There were also mobile test units. And at the beginning, people operating the mobile test units didn't have tablets and they didn't have the application. So things were written down on bits of paper, photos were taken, they were sent back in, and we said, this is not the way to work. So we found some more tablets. We gave them the application so they could enter results directly. And this made things much easier when we came to data consolidation. Some things we looked at as well were we correlated things like the distance that people travel to a mobile test unit correlated positively with the number of positive cases. So in other words, the farther you travel, the more exposure you have potentially to the virus. So we could place the mobile test units in better places so that they serve people who didn't have to travel as far. Jane, I mean, that's a quick whistle-stop tour, but I would say that the final thing I would say about the whole thing is that data is not information, as we started with. So you have to take data, work out how to use it, work out how it can help people, and really stick to that straight line and make sure you deliver on that. And don't, sometimes vanity metrics, I call them, we had beautiful charts and they looked wonderful, but they didn't tell us anything. And that takes effort to create and to maintain. So always start with clear goals, review them continuously and update them where you need to. And at the end, when we had reports, if we said to someone, well, what we have here is a kind of a linear regression of data, some people would look at you blindly and say, what does it mean? And so we had to make sure that we educated everyone, that we explained to them, this is how this data can help you. This is a form that is relevant for you, and would sit with people and make sure they could use and consume that data in a good way before we moved on. Jane, can I pass to you maybe, and you can talk just a little about objectivity?
Absolutely, Matt, thank you. Are you going to carry on driving? Yes, thank you very much. Okay, so I think I'll start with the more sort of serious business side of objectivity, but I have got some fun facts at the end, so stay focused, guys. So Objectivity, we're a 30-year-old company specialising in digital transformation. Our heritage is very much in bespoke software development, systems integration and support. But as Matt has sort of alluded to with the project that we undertook with Lambeth, over the last 5 to 6 years, we've seen a definite rise in the use of data and data to gain better data intelligence, the use of data science, AI, machine learning, etc. So we're an IT services organisation, over 600 members of staff, with a range of different talents. So design engineers, developers in numerous technologies, business analysts, project managers, etc., etc. And we're very proud of the fact that our first customer, Morrison's, is still a customer of ours some 30 years later. Next slide, please, Matt. Okay, we work with many customers across both the private and the public sector. So you can see some of our logos here on the slide. Household names in the private sector that I'm sure you've all heard of, the likes of Morrison's, Primark and Royal London. And we work again with a number of different clients across the public sector. So notably Greater Manchester Combined Authority, Health Innovation Manchester, the NHS, Leonard Cheshire, DERA, DEFRA, lots and lots of different organisations across the public sector. And we've delivered various types of projects for each of those customers across the range of IT services that we offer. So traditional development solutions, low code solutions, data science and AI, DevOps and support, etc. Working across both private and public does mean that we can bring our experience from other sectors to play within the public sector. So if you look at one of the areas we work in, for instance, retail, whilst it's very different to the work that you perhaps do within local government, both sectors are looking to achieve first-class customer service. So if we can bring to play lessons that we've learned from the private sector, we'll do that and use those in our public sector projects. Head office is in Coventry in the UK, further offices in Wrocław, Gdansk and Hamburg, and we've recently opened an office in Regent Street in London. Next slide, please, Matt. Okay, I joined Objectivity just under 18 months ago, and I was told that Objectivity is very much a values-driven company. 18 months in, I'm very happy to say that that is definitely the case. We seek to uphold our core values of people, integrity, excellence, and agility in everything we do. So whether that's client-facing work or day-to-day in the office, we do try to adhere to those values. Integrity is key to us, so we strive to work with integrity in all of our projects, and we're always seeking a win-win outcome with all of our customer projects. What we ideally want to do is build sustainable long-term relationships. So if we work with you today, we'd like to be working with you in 5, 10, 15 years. And I'll quote the Morrison's example again, still with us after 30 years. And a significant amount of our work does come from referrals such as Morrison. So one business recommending us to another. Final slide for me then, Matt, you can move on, please. Okay, so here's our contact details. So head office in Coventry. While Matt was talking, I was frantically searching for some exciting facts that I could give you. So along the crisps theme, here we go. Our closest Walker's factory is 26 miles away in Leicester, and we are a mere 85 miles from the Walker's head office in Reading. It's not every day I get to include those facts in a company presentation. And on that note, Matt, I'll hand back over to you to sum up.
Thanks, Jane. So just a quick view on final thoughts. So really, the lessons we learned at Lambeth during the height of the pandemic should not be forgotten. So we learned many things. These have helped since. And my tenure ended a couple of months ago, but we're already applying many of the things we learned during the pandemic to other operations and initiatives. Data is not information. So, we've got this triangle of data, information, knowledge, and wisdom. And, data is just the raw output of something, and you have to make sense of it so you can provide meaningful insights that then help people to make informed decisions. This is really important. So we looked for a long time at disrepair and housing disrepair. And actually what we found was that many of the cases that we uncovered were actually down to human behavior. So people would dry the wet clothes with the windows shut, for example. So rather than looking at all of the data that was collected from maintenance, we went out and spoke to the actual people, the residents themselves, and we uncovered some insights that we wouldn't have found otherwise. Always align activity to clear and agreed benefits. So just always challenge yourself to make sure that what you're doing is delivering value, and also delivering the highest potential value that you can. And I think that important exercise of value effort mapping really helps you to prioritize. What I would say is the highest priority is day one, sometimes entirely different on day 5. So always go back and review them. Bias is inherent in data. We can't rule out bias completely, but we can be aware of it. And it's really important to try and understand what that bias or how that bias affects what we're doing, and try to avoid sometimes the negative impact that it can have. And we found many areas of bias, sometimes because historical data, by definition comes from a different period with different behaviors and different social ways of working and living. Empower data consumers to understand what data is telling them. So more than that, what we found was that we delivered digital initiatives and reports for contact tracing, for surge testing, for isolation support and payments, for just vaccinations. We were doing so many different things. And what happens once you deliver something, they go wrong from time to time. So we have to make sure that people can support them themselves to an extent, because otherwise, halfway through, we just have no capacity left. So we spent a lot of time empowering people so that they could have a report which they could change themselves, or have a dynamic report. So they didn't have to keep knocking the door and saying, this report's okay, but the time period's wrong, or we're missing a critical feature. We trained people so they could add these themselves. And of course, they still need help and support from us, but it was much less. And also, people were happy because it cut down the delay of making a request, a non-critical request to us, when other things have to come first. So operating in silos. So don't operate in silos. We found that talking to the benefits department had a profound impact on whether someone would be evicted from their housing. So if we just looked at housing association and housing data, then that gave us some insights, but it didn't give us enough. So talking to other people around them, we learned a lot more. And I think the final thing is close collaboration and engagement is essential for success. I mentioned that no one's better than everybody. So get feedback from everyone, no matter how silly ideas may be. We had some ideas that we thought were crazy, but actually after implementing them, they delivered a lot of value for us. So always put things on the table. We can always brush them aside, but don't be afraid to make suggestions, and don't be afraid to look really hard at what data is telling you, because sometimes a straight line graph, the old saying that correlation is not causation. So, there might be a relationship, but it doesn't necessarily mean that one thing is absolutely affecting the other. And I think that's it really. So thank you all for listening. If there are any questions, we'd be delighted to try and address them for you.
Thank you very much, Matt.